The cabin went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in first class, except for the sneering voice of Captain Richard Hayes. "I don't care what your ticket says, sweetheart," the captain spat, looming over the woman in seat 1A. "Christmas is for people who belong here. You are moving to the back, or you are getting off my plane. Now." He thought he was humiliated at a nobody. A woman in a hoodie he assumed couldn't afford the champagne on her tray. He didn't know he was shouting at the woman who had signed his paycheck that morning. He didn't know that the nobody in seat 1A was Kendra Brooks, the billionaire owner of the very airline he was flying. And before this flight lands, Captain Hayes is going to learn that on this plane, there is only one person who decides who stays and who goes. The snow outside O'Hare International Airport was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, coating the tarmac in a silence that felt almost peaceful. But inside the cabin of Flight 402 bound for Aspen, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. It was Christmas Eve, the busiest, most stressful travel day of the year. The air inside the first-class cabin smelled of expensive leather, sanitizing wipes, and the faint, nervous perspiration of the flight crew. Kendra Brooks adjusted the hood of her oversized, charcoal grey sweatshirt and leaned back into the plush velvet of seat 1A. She was exhausted. 48 hours ago, she had finalized the hostile takeover of Ascend Airways, a mid-tier carrier that had been plaguing the news with safety violations and customer service nightmares. The acquisition had been done through shell companies and lawyers. To the public, Ascend Airways had been bought by a faceless conglomerate. To the employees, the new boss was a ghost. And Kendra intended to keep it that way, at least for one more flight. She just wanted to get to Aspen to surprise her father. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She pulled her noise-cancelling headphones over her ears, closing her eyes, hoping to disappear into the music before takeoff. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, prickly. Kendra ignored it, assuming it was directed at someone else. "Excuse me. Mom in 1A." A hand tapped her shoulder, hard. Kendra's eyes snapped open. She slid her headphones down to her neck and looked up. Standing over her was a flight attendant, her name tag reading Chloe. Chloe looked young, terrified, and pale. Her hands were trembling slightly as she held a manifest. But it wasn't Chloe who had spoken. Behind Chloe stood the pilot. Captain Richard Hayes was a man who wore his uniform like a costume of authority. He was tall, with silver fox hair that was perfectly coiffed, a jawline that had probably charmed 1,000 wealthy widows, and eyes that were currently cold and hard as flint. He wasn't in the cockpit where he belonged. He was standing in the aisle of first class, blocking the boarding flow. "Is there a problem?" Kendra asked, her voice calm but raspy from lack of sleep. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Captain Hayes said. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hoodie. Then he looked at her worn-out sneakers. Then he looked at the expensive crystal flute of pre-flight champagne sitting on her console. He sneered, a small, ugly curl of his lip. "Ticket." He didn't say please. He held out his hand, snapping his fingers. Kendra blinked. "I already showed my boarding pass at the gate, and to the attendant." "And now you're showing it to me," Hayes said, his voice booming enough that the passengers in 1B and 2A, an elderly couple in furs, stopped talking to watch. "We have a discrepancy in the manifest. This seat is reserved for a VIP priority member." "System glitch. I need to verify you're even supposed to be on this plane." Kendra felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the slow-burning anger she had learned to control during boardroom negotiations. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, displaying the digital boarding pass. "Kendra Brooks," she said, holding the screen up. "Seat 1A, paid in full." Hayes snatched the phone from her hand. He stared at the screen for a long time, as if willing the pixels to change. When they didn't, he shoved the phone back at her, almost dropping it on her lap. "Computer error," Hayes announced, turning his back on her to address Chloe. "The system overbooked the first-class cabin. We have a platinum status flyer at the gate who needs this seat. This passenger," he gestured vaguely at Kendra without looking at her, "needs to be relocated." Chloe looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. "Captain, the flight is fully booked. Economy is oversold by 3. There's nowhere to move her." Hayes leaned in close to Chloe, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that Kendra, with her sharp hearing, caught perfectly. "Then bump someone from economy, or put her in the jump seat. I don't care, Chloe, but Lana is getting on this flight, and she is sitting in 1A. Do I make myself clear?" Kendra's grip on her phone tightened. "Lana." This wasn't a system error. This was the captain trying to bounce a paying customer to sneak his girlfriend into first class. Kendra cleared her throat. "I'm not moving." Hayes spun around slowly. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Excuse me?" "I said, I'm not moving," Kendra repeated, unbuckling her seatbelt and standing up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that usually made men in suits step back. "I paid $4,000 for this seat. I have a confirmation number. I am not a system error, and I am certainly not moving so you can give my seat to your friend." The silence that followed was deafening. The elderly woman in 1B gasped audibly. Hayes stepped into Kendra's personal space. He smelled of strong cologne and stale coffee. He lowered his head, his blue eyes filled with a toxic mix of arrogance and prejudice. "Listen to me," he hissed. "I don't know how you got that ticket. Maybe you used a stolen card. Maybe you won a lottery. But you don't fit here. Look around you." He gestured to the cabin. "These are respectable people. You look like you wandered in from a bus station. Now I am the captain. Under federal law, I have the right to remove any passenger who disturbs the peace or threatens the safety of the flight." "I am sitting quietly," Kendra said, her voice turning icy. "You are the one disturbing the peace. You are refusing a direct order from the pilot in command." Hayes raised his voice, playing to the audience now. "That is a federal offense. Now grab your trash and get to the back of the plane, or I will have airport security drag you off this aircraft in handcuffs. It's Christmas Eve, sweetheart. Do you really want to spend it in a holding cell?" Kendra looked at him. She looked at Chloe, who had tears in her eyes. She looked at the other passengers, who were studiously looking away, unwilling to defend her. She realized something. If she fought this now, the flight would be cancelled. She wouldn't get to Aspen, and she wouldn't see exactly how deep the rot in her new company went. Kendra smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll move." Hayes smirked, straightening his tie. "Smart choice. Chloe, find her a middle seat in the back, and get the cleaning crew to wipe down 1A. Lana is waiting at the gate." Kendra grabbed her bag. As she brushed past Hayes, she paused. "You really shouldn't judge a book by its cover, Captain. You never know how the story ends." Hayes laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Get moving. You're holding up the real passengers." The walk to the back of the plane was a walk of shame, orchestrated by Captain Hayes. He stood at the front of the aisle, watching her go, arms crossed like a prison warden. As Kendra moved through business class and into economy, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew stuffier. The seats became narrower. The overhead bins were overflowing with winter coats and holiday gifts. Chloe led her all the way to the last row. Row 42. It was the row right against the lavatories, where the seats didn't recline, and the smell of chemical toilet disinfectant was permanent. "I'm so sorry, Mum," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. I tried to tell him. He does this. He's the senior pilot for the region. If we report him, he writes us up for insubordination, and we get fired. Please, just don't cause a scene. For your own sake." Kendra looked at the young flight attendant. She saw the fear. This wasn't just a one-time jerk. Hayes was a tyrant who ran his crew on fear. "It's not your fault, Chloe," Kendra said gently. "What's your last name?" "Daniels," Chloe said, wiping her eye. "Chloe Daniels." "Okay, Chloe Daniels, you're doing a good job. Just get me a water, please." Kendra squeezed into seat 42B. To her left was a man who was already asleep and snoring loudly, his elbow jutting into her ribs. To her right was a teenage boy playing a video game at maximum volume without headphones. "Merry Christmas," Kendra thought. She pulled out her phone. She had no Wi-Fi yet, but she drafted a text to her chief legal officer, Marcus. "Draft. I need the complete personnel file on Captain Richard Hayes. ID number 18944 Alpha. Also, pull the manifest for Flight 402. Who is listed in Seat 1A now? She didn't send it yet." She waited. 10 minutes later, the plane was fully boarded. The intercom crackled. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Hayes from the flight deck. We apologize for the slight delay in departure. We had a minor passenger security issue that has been resolved. We're expecting a smooth ride to Aspen. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." Kendra gritted her teeth. Security issue. He was slandering her to the entire plane. Through the gap in the curtain, separating economy from business, Kendra could just barely see the front of the plane when the flight attendants moved through. She craned her neck. Walking down the aisle toward first class was a woman. She was blonde, dressed in a white faux fur coat that looked expensive but tacky, carrying a designer bag that Kendra instantly recognized as a knockoff. She was chewing gum and talking loudly on her phone. "I know, right? Ricky totally came through. He kicked some scrub out of first class for me. Yeah, free champagne, baby." It was Lana. Kendra watched as Lana reached row 1. She watched as Lana threw her coat onto the seat Kendra had paid for, treating the flight attendants like servants. Honey," Lana's voice carried over the hum of the engines. "My champagne is warm. Get me a fresh one, and make it snappy, I'm parched." Kendra sat back in seat 42B, the smell of the lavatory wafting over her. The injustice burned in her chest like heartburn. But as the plane taxied to the runway, Kendra began to formulate a plan. She wasn't just going to fire Richard Hayes. Firing him was too easy. He needed to be exposed. He needed to feel the ground fall out from under him while he was still in the air. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. She turned to a fresh page. Step 1, gather witnesses. Step 2, document the safety violations. Step 3, the reveal. The plane roared down the runway, picking up speed. The force pressed Kendra into the uncomfortable, non-reclining seat. "Hey, lady," the kid next to her said, jamming his elbow into her. "You're on my armrest." Kendra moved her arm. "Sorry. You shouldn't be back here if you don't fit," the kid muttered. Kendra looked out the tiny, scratched window as the lights of Chicago fell away beneath them. "You have no idea," she whispered to the glass. About an hour into the flight, the fasten seatbelt sign turned off. The service carts began to roll. In economy, the service was brusque, a bag of pretzels and half a can of soda. Kendra stood up. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is off, but we recommend you stay seated," a male flight attendant said. He looked tired. "I need to use the restroom," Kendra lied, "and I need to stretch my legs." She walked up the aisle. She needed to get closer to the cockpit. She needed to see what was happening in first class. As she passed through the curtain into business, she was stopped by Chloe. "Mum, you can't be up here," Chloe whispered frantically. If he sees you... I'm just going to the forward lavatory, Chloe. The rear one is... occupied, Kendra said smoothly. She stepped into first class. The difference was jarring. The lights were dimmed to a soothing blue. The air smelled better. And there, in Seat 1A, was Lana. Lana had her shoes off, her bare feet propped up on the bulkhead wall. A major safety violation, and just plain gross. She had 3 empty champagne glasses on her tray. She was laughing loudly at a movie on her screen, oblivious to the people around her. The cockpit door opened. Kendra froze. Captain Hayes stepped out. It was a violation of protocol for the pilot to leave the cockpit without a barrier set up, but Hayes clearly didn't care about rules. He was smiling, holding a fresh bottle of wine. He walked straight to seat 1A. "How's my girl doing?" Hayes asked, leaning over Lana, his hand resting familiarly on her shoulder. "Ricky," Lana squealed. "This is amazing, but the steak was a little dry. You should fire the chef." Hayes laughed. "I own this plane, babe. I can do whatever I want. I'll make a note of it. Anything for you." "I own this plane." The words echoed in Kendra's head. He actually claimed he owned the plane. It was the ultimate arrogance. Hayes looked up and locked eyes with Kendra, who was standing near the galley. His smile vanished instantly. "What are you doing up here?" he barked, his voice shattering the first-class calm. "I told you to stay in the zoo." "I needed the restroom," Kendra said, holding her ground. "The rear one is broken." "I don't care if you have to hold it." Hayes stepped toward her, his face turning red. "You do not cross this curtain. You are contaminating the first-class experience. Get back to your seat before I have you zip-tied." Lana turned around, looking Kendra up and down. She let out a cruel giggle. "You, Ricky, is that the one? She looks like a janitor. Why did you even let her on?" "Charity," Hayes sneered. "Company policy, but I'm rethinking it." He grabbed Kendra's arm. His grip was painful. "Go, now." Kendra looked down at his hand on her arm. This was assault. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Or what?" Hayes challenged, squeezing tighter. "You're going to complain. Who are you going to complain to? I am the highest authority at 30,000 feet. There is no one above me." Kendra pulled her arm free with a sharp jerk. She smoothed her hoodie. "You're right, Richard," she said, using his first name for the first time. "At 30,000 feet, you are the boss. But we have to land eventually." She turned and walked back to economy, her heart pounding not with fear, but with adrenaline. As she sat back down in row 42, the turbulence started. It wasn't just a bump. The plane dropped. A sudden, violent drop that made stomachs lurch and overhead bins rattle. Screams erupted from the passengers. The plane shuddered, vibrating violently. Kendra knew planes. She was a licensed pilot herself. That's how she had built her first shipping company. She knew the feel of clear air turbulence, and she knew the feel of mechanical failure. This was mechanical. The vibration was coming from the number 2 engine. The intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes's voice came over, but the arrogance was gone. He sounded breathless. We are experiencing some unexpected rough air. Please fasten your seatbelts immediately. Flight attendants, take your stations." The plane dropped again, harder this time. Oxygen masks in row 30 deployed by mistake. Kendra looked out the window. It was pitch black, but she could see sparks, tiny, terrifying sparks, trailing from the right wing. The owner of the plane was in trouble, and Kendra realized with a sinking feeling that her revenge plan might have to wait. Right now, she just had to survive. The plane was no longer flying. It was fighting to stay in the air. The mechanical grinding noise from the right side of the aircraft had transformed into a rhythmic, terrifying banging, like a sledgehammer hitting the fuselage every 2 seconds. Thud, thud, thud. With each impact, the cabin lights flickered, casting the terrified faces of the passengers in strobe light bursts of grey and darkness. In row 42, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of raw panic, sweat, tears, and the acrid smell of ozone bleeding in from the ventilation system. Kendra braced her legs against the seat in front of her. Beside her, the teenage boy, Leo, had dropped his game console. He was gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white, his breathing coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. "Are we going to crash?" Leo asked, his voice small and trembling, sounding much younger than his 16 years. "My mum is waiting in Aspen. She's waiting for me." Kendra reached over and placed a firm hand on his forearm. "Look at me, Leo." The boy turned his wide, terrified eyes toward her. "We are not going to crash," Kendra lied. She didn't know that for sure. The vibration suggested a compressor stall in the number 2 engine, possibly a turbine blade separation. It was catastrophic if not handled perfectly, but she needed him calm. The pilots train for this. The plane can fly on 1 engine. Just breathe. But up in the cockpit, the training was failing. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life. It wasn't the calm, authoritative voice of a captain reassuring his passengers. It was the sound of an argument. Captain Hayes had keyed the mic, but in his panic, he hadn't realized he was broadcasting to the entire cabin. "I don't care what the manual says, Dawson. We are not diverting to Des Moines." Hayes's voice boomed through the speakers, shrill and frantic. "Do you know the paperwork involved in a diversion? I have a dinner reservation at the St. Regis at 8. Push the throttle. Override the limiter." A collective gasp went through the cabin. "Captain, EGT is redlining." A second voice, First Officer Dawson, cut in, sounding desperate. "We have severe vibration. We're losing thrust. We have to declare an emergency and set it down. Now." "Don't you tell me how to fly my plane, boy!" Hayes screamed back. "I said maintain altitude. If we divert, corporate will be all over my arse about maintenance logs. We push through." The connection cut with a sharp static pop. Silence, except for the banging engine, reigned in the cabin. The passengers looked at each other in horror. The pilot wasn't trying to save them. He was trying to save his dinner plans and hide a paperwork trail. He was gambling with 300 lives to avoid an administrative headache. "He's going to kill us!" The man sleeping next to Kendra woke up, his eyes bulging. "He's going to kill us all!" A woman 2 rows up started screaming, "Let me off! Open the door!" Panic is a contagion. It moves faster than fire. Within seconds, people were unbuckling. Someone was shouting about storming the cockpit. The flight attendants, terrified themselves, were frozen in the aisles. Kendra knew she had to act, not as the owner, but as a leader. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The plane lurched, throwing her hip into the armrest, but she kept her balance. "Sit down." Kendra's voice wasn't a scream. It was a command. It projected from her diaphragm, honed by years of commanding boardrooms filled with hostile investors. "Everyone, sit down and strap in, now!" The authority in her voice cut through the noise. Heads turned toward the back of the plane, toward the nobody in the hoodie. "You heard what he said," the screaming woman yelled back. "He's not landing." "The first officer is rational," Kendra announced, scanning the faces of the terrified passengers. "Dawson wants to land. But if you panic, you shift the center of gravity and make it impossible for him to control the plane. If you want to live, you sit down, you buckle up, and you put your heads down." She looked at Chloe, the young flight attendant who was trembling near the galley. "Chloe," Kendra said, locking eyes with her, "get on the interphone. Call the cockpit. Tell Dawson the cabin is secured for emergency landing. Do it now." Chloe blinked, tears streaming down her face, but Kendra's calmness anchored her. She nodded, grabbed the handset, and punched the button. Kendra didn't sit back down immediately. She walked up the aisle to row 38, where a young mother was struggling to put an infant life vest on her baby. Kendra's hands were steady as she secured the straps. "Tighten it here," Kendra whispered. "Hold him close. You're going to be okay." As she moved back to her seat, the plane banked sharply to the left. The engine noise changed from a rhythmic banging to a high-pitched whine, and then silence on the right side. The engine had ceased. "Ladies and gentlemen," First Officer Dawson's voice came over the PA, shaky but determined. "This is the First Officer speaking. We have shut down the number 2 engine. We are declaring an emergency and diverting to Des Moines International. We will be on the ground in 20 minutes. It will be a rough approach due to the blizzard. Please follow the crew's instructions." He didn't mention Captain Hayes. Kendra sank back into seat 42B. She checked Leo's seatbelt. "Des Moines," Leo whispered. "That's in Iowa, right?" "Cornfields and good people," Kendra said, forcing a smile. "Safest place on Earth." But as the plane descended through the cloud layer, the turbulence turned violent. The overhead bins rattled like maracas. A suitcase fell out 3 rows ahead, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. And then the curtain to first class whipped open. Lana, the woman who had taken Kendra's seat, stumbled into economy. She was clutching her white fur coat, her face a mask of smeared mascara and terror. She wasn't holding a drink anymore. She was holding a rosary. "I can't sit up there," Lana shrieked, looking for an empty seat. "I saw smoke. The wing is on fire. I'm not dying in the front." She tried to shove herself into a middle seat in row 10, sitting on top of a businessman's lap. "Get off me," the man yelled. "I'm the captain's girlfriend," Lana screamed, flailing. "I get priority. Save me." It was pathetic. It was grotesque. And it was the perfect distraction from the terrifying reality that the ground was rushing up to meet them at 200 miles per hour. The descent into Des Moines was a nightmare of physics. The blizzard had turned the world outside into a swirling grey void. The wind shear was hammering the single-engine aircraft, tossing the Boeing 737 like a paper toy. Kendra closed her eyes and visualized the instrument panel. She knew what Dawson was fighting, asymmetric thrust. With only the left engine working, the plane wanted to turn right. He had to stand on the left rudder pedal with all his weight, just to keep the nose straight. It was exhausting, brutal work. And where was Hayes? Kendra suspected Hayes had frozen. She had seen it before in high-ego men. When their bluster failed, they crumbled. "Brace, brace, brace!" Chloe screamed from her jump seat, her voice breaking on the last word. Kendra grabbed her ankles, putting her head between her knees. "Head down, Leo! Stay down!" The wheels slammed into the tarmac with a force that felt like a car crash. The plane bounced, once, twice, hard enough to rattle teeth. The tires screamed as the brakes locked. The reverse thruster on the remaining engine roared to life, dragging them to a shuddering, violent halt. The plane skidded sideways, the nose gear sliding off the runway into the snow-packed mud. With a final, sickening lurch, the aircraft came to a stop, tilted at a crazy angle. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the cabin erupted. "Evacuate! Evacuate!" Kendra didn't scramble. She unbuckled and immediately turned to Leo. "Go! Aisle! Move!" She pushed him toward the flow of traffic. The emergency exits over the wings had been popped open, and freezing cold air and snow swirled into the cabin. Kendra moved against the current. She wasn't leaving yet. She checked the rows around her. The elderly man who had been sleeping was struggling with his buckle. Kendra snapped it open for him and helped him stand. "Go!" she ordered. She made her way forward. The aisle was a crush of bodies. People were screaming, climbing over seats. When Kendra reached the front of economy, she saw a sight that made her blood boil colder than the Iowa winter. The main cabin door was open, the emergency slide was deployed, and standing at the bottom of the slide, on the snowy tarmac, was Captain Richard Hayes. He was the first one off. He hadn't checked the cabin. He hadn't helped the passengers. He hadn't even waited for his crew. He had grabbed his flight bag and Lana's hand, and they had slid down to safety before anyone else. "That son of a," Kendra muttered. "Mom, you have to jump." A firefighter was standing at the bottom of the slide now, waving at her. Kendra looked back. The plane was empty, except for the crew. Dawson stumbled out of the cockpit, looking ashen, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at the empty cabin, then at Kendra. "Is everyone off?" Dawson asked, his voice shaking. "I checked the back," Kendra said calmly. "Row 20 to 42 is clear. You did a hell of a landing, Dawson." Dawson looked at her, confused by this passenger who knew his name and spoke like a veteran pilot. "The captain. He just left. He said the structure might collapse." "He ran," Kendra corrected him. "Go. I'm right behind you." Kendra slid down the yellow emergency chute, landing in the slush and snow of the tarmac. The wind was howling, biting through her hoodie. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, their red and blue lights reflecting off the white snow. Passengers were huddled in groups, wrapped in foil blankets handed out by the fire crew, shivering and crying. Kendra stood up and brushed the snow off her jeans. She saw Hayes standing near a fire truck, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming cup of coffee that a paramedic had given him. Lana was clinging to his arm, wailing about her lost luggage. Hayes was already spinning off the story. He was gesturing wildly to a police officer and an airport official. Kendra walked toward them. She didn't run. She walked with a slow, predatory determination. As she got closer, she heard Hayes. "Heroic effort, really," Hayes was saying, his voice regaining that fake baritone confidence. "The equipment on these older planes, it's criminal. I've been telling corporate for months that the maintenance cycles are being skipped. If I hadn't taken manual control and overridden the computer, we would have been a crater in that field. I saved everyone today." The police officer was nodding, taking notes. "Sounds like a close call, Captain." "It was," Hayes sighed, shaking his head. "You do your best, but when the company puts profits over safety, well, you get this. I'm just glad my skills were enough to compensate for their negligence." Kendra stopped 5 feet away from him. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but her eyes were fixed on Hayes. "Liar," she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the wind. Hayes turned. He saw the hoodie woman from seat 1A. He rolled his eyes. "Officer," Hayes said, pointing a gloved finger at Kendra. "This is the disruptive passenger I told you about. She caused a scene in Chicago. I think she might have been intoxicated. Keep her away from me." The police officer stepped forward, hand resting on his belt. "Mom, I need you to step back. The captain is debriefing." "The captain," Kendra said, her voice rising, "is a liar who tried to fly a damaged plane to Aspen to keep a dinner reservation. I heard the cockpit audio, Richard. We all did." Hayes' face twitched. "That was out of context. Stress response? You don't know anything about aviation." "And," Kendra continued, stepping around the officer, "he evacuated the aircraft before his passengers. He left children and elderly people behind to save his own skin." "That is a lie," Hayes shouted, his face reddening. "I performed a structural assessment from the ground. It's standard protocol." "It's cowardice," Kendra spat. "Who are you?" Hayes sneered, stepping close to her again, using his height to intimidate. "You're nobody. You're an economy passenger with a cheap ticket and a big mouth. You want to talk about laws? I can have you banned from every airline in this country for interfering with a flight crew. I'll make sure you never fly again." Kendra reached into her back pocket. Her phone was wet, but it still worked. She pulled it out. "You really think I'm nobody?" Kendra asked softly. "I know you are," Hayes laughed. "Look at you." Kendra tapped the screen. She brought up the app for the Global News Network. The breaking news banner was already flashing. Emergency landing in Des Moines. She tapped her contacts. She hit the speed dial for Marcus Vance, the chief legal officer of the parent company. She put it on speaker. "Kendra!" Marcus's voice came through loud and clear. "My God, we saw the news. The transponder data looked erratic. Are you safe? Is the jet intact?" "I'm fine, Marcus," Kendra said, holding the phone up so Hayes could hear. "But I need you to do something for me immediately." "Name it," Marcus said. "I need you to suspend Captain Richard Hayes, ID 8944 Alpha, effective immediately. And I need you to send a private jet to Des Moines. I have a flight crew to fire and a new flight crew to hire." Hayes went pale. The coffee cup shook in his hand. Who is this?" "This," Kendra said, looking Hayes dead in the eye, "is Kendra Brooks, CEO of Brooks Holdings, and the new owner of Ascend Airways." She paused, letting the words sink in like daggers. "I own the plane, Richard. I own the uniform you're wearing. And as of right now, I am personally cancelling your ticket." The silence on the tarmac was colder than the wind. Hayes stared at the phone, then at Kendra. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance that had shielded him for decades evaporated, leaving a trembling, pathetic man in its wake. "You," Hayes stammered. "You can't be. Brooks Holdings is, I thought. You thought you could bully a woman in a hoodie because you assumed she was poor," Kendra finished for him. She lowered the phone but didn't hang up. "You assumed my value was based on my seat number. Big mistake." Lana, realizing the shift in power instantly, dropped Hayes' arm like it was burning hot. She took a step away from him. I didn't know, ma'am. He told me to sit there. He forced me." Kendra ignored Lana. She turned to the police officer, who looked stunned. "Officer," Kendra said, her voice calm and professional, "I would like to file a formal report regarding Captain Hayes' conduct, specifically endangering the lives of 184 passengers by refusing to divert during a mechanical failure and violating FAA regulation 4 CFR 91.3 by abandoning his aircraft before the passengers were safe. We have the cockpit voice recorder data to prove it." The officer looked at Hayes, whose face was now a sickly shade of grey. "Is this true, Captain?" Hayes wiped his mouth. I was assessing the... Look, Miss Brooks, surely we can discuss this. It's Christmas. I have a pension. I've been with this airline for 20 years. And for 20 years, you've probably been a bully, Kendra said. But that ends tonight. The airport shuttle buses arrived to take the freezing passengers to the terminal. Kendra turned to leave, but Hayes reached out, grabbing her shoulder in a last-ditch effort to beg. "Please," he whimpered. "Don't ruin me." Kendra brushed his hand off as if it were dirt. "I didn't ruin you, Richard. You ruined yourself. I'm just the one signing the paperwork." Inside the terminal, the scene was chaotic but warm. Des Moines International was a small airport, and the sudden arrival of a plane load of shaken passengers had overwhelmed the staff. Kendra walked through the sliding doors. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She saw the passengers huddled in the waiting area, Leo, the teenager, was sitting with the elderly couple from first class. They were sharing a blanket. The social divide of the airplane had vanished. Trauma had made them all equals. When Kendra walked in, Chloe, the flight attendant, spotted her. "Mom!" Chloe ran over, still shivering. "Are you okay? I saw you talking to the police." "I'm fine, Chloe," Kendra said. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Chloe admitted, her hands shaking. I think I'm going to quit. I can't fly with him again. He left us. He just left us." "You don't have to quit," Kendra said, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "And you won't ever fly with him again. Captain Hayes has been relieved of duty." First Officer Dawson approached them. He looked exhausted, his uniform stained with sweat and oil. "He's gone?" Dawson asked. "Permanently," Kendra confirmed. Dawson let out a long breath, leaning against a pillar. "Thank God, I thought. When he refused to divert, I thought I was going to have to fight him for the controls." "You did the right thing, Dawson," Kendra said. "You got us down. You're the reason everyone is alive." Kendra looked around the terminal. The vending machines were empty. The few staff members were overwhelmed. It was Christmas Eve, and these people were stranded in Iowa. Kendra raised her phone to her ear. Marcus was still on the line. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here, Kendra. The termination letter is being drafted. Security is notifying the FAA." "Good. Now, I need logistics," Kendra said, looking at the tired faces around her. "I have 184 passengers stranded in Des Moines on Christmas Eve. I want 3 charter jets here within 4 hours. I want hotel rooms for everyone tonight, at the best hotel in the city. Open a tab for food and drinks, unlimited. And I want refund checks issued to every single passenger for triple the cost of their ticket. Overnight the checks." Marcus hesitated. "Kendra, that's going to cost almost $2 million. Kendra looked at the mother rocking her baby in the corner. She looked at Leo. She looked at the elderly woman who had been terrified in seat 1B. "I bought this airline to fix it, Marcus," Kendra said firmly. "This is the first step. Do it." "Understood," Marcus said. "Merry Christmas, boss." Kendra hung up. She walked over to the center of the room. She wasn't the woman in the hoodie anymore. She wasn't the nobody from seat 42B. She was the leader these people deserved. "Everyone?" Kendra raised her voice. The chatter died down. "Can I have your attention?" Hundreds of eyes turned to her. "My name is Kendra Brooks. I am the new owner of Ascend Airways." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The kid, Leo, dropped his jaw. "I want to apologize for what happened tonight," she continued. "It was unacceptable, and the man responsible has been fired." A few people started to clap. "But words aren't enough," Kendra said. "I have buses coming to take you all to the Marriott downtown. Dinner is on me. Tomorrow morning, 3 private charters will be here to take you to your final destinations, and you will all be receiving full refunds plus compensation for this nightmare." The room was silent for a second, and then it erupted in cheers. Real cheers. People were crying, hugging each other. Leo ran up to her. You own the plane. But you were in the back with us. You were sitting next to the toilets." Kendra smiled, ruffling the kid's hair. "The back is where you learn what's really going on, Leo. If I had stayed in first class, I never would have seen the truth." Just then, the automatic doors opened. Captain Hayes walked in, trailed by the police officer and Lana. He looked defeated, stripped of his authority. He wasn't wearing his captain's hat anymore. He was holding it. The room went silent. The passengers glared at him. Hayes looked at Kendra, surrounded by the people he had abandoned. He looked at the respect they had for her, a respect he had never earned, only demanded. He turned his head away, unable to meet her gaze, and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the snowy Iowa night. But the karma wasn't done yet. The Des Moines Marriott downtown was a beacon of warmth in the freezing city. The lobby was decked out in extravagant Christmas decorations, a 20-foot tree shimmering with gold ornaments, a roaring fireplace that smelled of hickory, and soft jazz playing over the speakers. It was a stark contrast to the terror of the last 3 hours. Kendra had turned the hotel ballroom into a makeshift crisis center. Waiters were moving through the room with trays of hot cocoa, sliders, and warm soup. The passengers of Flight 402, still wrapped in blankets but slowly regaining their color, sat in clusters, eating and talking. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a sense of bonded survival. Kendra stood in the corner of the ballroom, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to Vance, her chief legal officer. "I want the audit started tonight, Vance," Kendra said, her voice low but intense. "I don't care that it's Christmas Eve. Wake up the accounting team. Hayes mentioned skipping maintenance cycles to save money. If he did that, it's not just negligence, it's criminal fraud. I want to know every bolt, every screw, every sensor that was ignored on his watch." "We're already on it," Vance replied, the sound of typing furious in the background. "And Kendra?" "I pulled his financials. You're going to want to hear this. Hayes has been charging personal expenses to the corporate account for years. Dinners, hotels, jewelry. He's been treating the airline's operating budget like his personal piggy bank." Kendra's eyes narrowed. "Good. Freeze it all. Lock him out of everything. I want him to feel what it's like to have zero access." "Consider it done. By the way, the NTSB just contacted us. They want to interview him." It looks like he wiped the cockpit voice recorder for the last 30 minutes of the flight before he left the plane. Kendra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "He erased the evidence?" "He tried," Vance corrected. "But the data uploads to the cloud in real time on the new 730 Evans. We have everything. The audio of him refusing to divert, the audio of him panicking, and the audio of him leaving the plane first. He's finished, Kendra. He's looking at prison time." Kendra hung up the phone. Justice was coming, but she had a feeling the drama wasn't over yet. Just then, the heavy revolving doors of the hotel lobby spun open. A gust of freezing wind blew in, followed by Captain Richard Hayes and Lana. They looked wretched. Hayes's uniform was soaked, his expensive shoes ruined by the slush. He was shivering violently. Lana was mascara-stained, her fake fur coat matted and wet. They had clearly walked. No taxi would pick them up. The chatter in the ballroom died down. 184 passengers turned to watch the man who had abandoned them. Hayes didn't look at them. He marched straight to the front desk, trying to summon the last shreds of his authority. "I need a suite," Hayes barked at the young receptionist, whose name tag read Emily. "The presidential suite. And I want a bottle of Dom Perignon sent up immediately. I've had a hell of a night." He slapped a platinum credit card onto the marble counter. It was an Ascend Airways corporate card. Emily typed on her keyboard, her face neutral. She swiped the card. "Beep." She frowned. She swiped it again. "Beep." "I'm sorry, sir," Emily said politely. "This card has been declined." "Don't be ridiculous," Hayes snapped, his voice echoing in the silent lobby. "That is a corporate card with an unlimited limit. Try it again." "I have tried it twice, sir. The code is stolen or lost. I'm required to confiscate it." Hayes's face went purple. "Confiscate it? Do you know who I am? I am a senior captain." "And I am the owner of the account," a voice cut through the air. Kendra stepped out from the ballroom. She had shed the hoodie and was wearing a clean white sweater she'd bought from the hotel gift shop. She looked fresh, calm, and utterly in control. Hayes spun around. When he saw her, his eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. But he was surrounded by the passengers he had wronged. "You blocked my card," Hayes hissed. "I blocked my card," Kendra corrected. "You don't work for Ascend anymore, remember? You don't get sweets. You don't get champagne. You don't even get a free pretzel." Lana, standing behind Hayes, let out a gasp. She pulled out her phone. "Ricky, my card isn't working either. The supplementary card you gave me. It says account closed." Hayes turned to Lana, panic rising in his chest. "Babe, it's a glitch. She's just being petty. We'll sort it out in the morning." "Sort it out?" Lana screeched. "We are in Iowa. It's Christmas Eve. I have no clothes, no money, and I'm freezing. You said you were a millionaire." "I am," Hayes yelled. "I have millions in assets." "Actually," Kendra interrupted, taking a step closer, "Vance just finished a preliminary audit. You don't have millions, Richard. You have debt. Massive gambling debt that you've been covering up by embezzling maintenance funds. You're not a millionaire. You're broke." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Lana stared at Hayes. The adoration in her eyes vanished, replaced by pure, unfiltered disgust. You fraud," Lana spat. "Lana, baby, listen." Hayes reached for her. Lana slapped him. The sound was crisp and loud, echoing off the high ceilings. "Don't touch me. I missed my family dinner for you. I flew to this God-forsaken place for you." She turned to Kendra. "Mom, does the offer for the hotel room extend to ex-girlfriends of the pilot?" Kendra looked at Lana. She was shallow, yes, but she was also a victim of Hayes's lies. "Room 304 is open," Kendra said calmly. "Go get warm." Lana didn't look back. She marched to the elevator, leaving Hayes standing alone in the center of the lobby. Hayes looked around. The passengers were staring at him with a mix of pity and anger. The receptionist was holding his cut-up credit card. He had no money, no coat, no woman, and no job. "You can't do this," Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. "It's Christmas. Where am I supposed to go?" Kendra looked at him without an ounce of sympathy. "There's a homeless shelter 3 blocks east," Kendra said, pointing to the door. "They serve a hot meal at midnight. If you run, you might make it before they close the doors." "I am a captain," Hayes shouted, tears finally spilling over. "I don't go to shelters." "You're not a captain anymore, Mr. Hayes," Kendra said softly. "Tonight you're just a passenger, and you missed your flight." She signaled to the hotel security. 2 large men in blazers stepped forward. "Escort Mr. Hayes off the property," Kendra ordered. "He is trespassing." As the security guards grabbed Hayes by the arms and dragged him toward the revolving doors, he screamed threats and pleas, but they were swallowed by the wind as he was shoved out into the snowy night. Kendra watched him go. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Dawson, the first officer. "That was brutal," Dawson said quietly. "That was necessary," Kendra replied. "Now go get some sleep, Captain Dawson. You have a flight to command in the morning." Dawson blinked. "Captain, but You're the acting chief pilot now," Kendra smiled. "Don't make me regret it." Christmas morning in Des Moines wasn't spent in the terminal. 3 sleek Gulfstream jets, chartered overnight by Kendra, waited on the glistening tarmac. As the passengers of Flight 402 boarded, sipping fresh mimosas and settling into cream leather seats, the nightmare of the previous night felt like a distant memory. Kendra stood by the stairs, shaking every hand, transforming from the nobody in the hoodie to the savior of Christmas. Upon landing in Aspen, Kendra bypassed the media frenzy to visit the Golden Leaf Hospice. Her father, Elias, smiled weakly from his wheelchair, his eyes full of pride. "You didn't just buy a company, Kenny," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "You saved people." It was the validation she had fought for her entire life. The karma that followed for Richard Hayes was swift, public, and brutal. The NTSB investigation proved he had wiped the cockpit voice recorder, a felony that, combined with Vance's financial audit, sealed his fate. Hayes was stripped of his pilot's license and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and reckless endangerment. His millions were revealed to be debt, his assets were seized to repay the airline, and Lana sold her survival story to a tabloid before ghosting him completely. He went from the captain's chair to a concrete cell. 6 months later, Ascend Airways was reborn as Phoenix Air, now rated #1 for safety. Sitting in her Chicago office, Kendra received a text from Leo, the teenager from row 42. "First solo flight today. Thanks for the scholarship, boss." Kendra smiled, looking at a framed photo on her desk. It was a picture of seat 1A, which she now kept permanently empty on the holiday route, with a plaque that read, "Reserved for those who lead from the back." And that is how Captain Richard Hayes learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never judge a passenger by their hoodie, and never, ever assume you're the most powerful person in the room just because you have a uniform. Hayes spent his next Christmas in a prison cell, eating a meal that was definitely worse than economy-class pretzels. Kendra Brooks proved that true power isn't about where you sit. It's about how you treat people when the turbulence hits. What do you think? Did Hayes deserve 8 years in prison, or should the punishment have been even harsher? And would you have forgiven Lana? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel soar. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy revenge drama coming up next week about a cheating husband who didn't realize his wife was the judge in his divorce case. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.